Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Fact, fiction, truth. Whether writing stories about the Mescalero Apache named Yellow Boy or histories about Geronimo, author W. Michael Farmer deals with all of these, fact, fiction, and truth. Michael speaks with Russell and Alan about his award-winning books.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm always glad to be here. I tell you that every week, and it's always true.
Well, Thanksgiving was nice, but I'm generally sort of glad to have it behind me and getting ready for Christmas. It's always, one holiday to the next. We make them, we don't take them here at the Dude Ranch. So
full to half full, and then back to full in a short period, I think.
Yeah. So we're talking history, and of course, maybe it's my favorite topic, the Apaches of Arizona, and of course, it says here Geronimo was born in Arizona. I thought he was born in New Mexico, so we're going to find out what's right about that. But of course, one of the biggest names ever in the American West, Geronimo, and I think you've got a story. So.
Well, our ranch was right on the New Mexico-Arizona border, but we didn't exactly border the reservation, the San Carlos Reservation, but we were just a few miles away. So we hired Indian cowboys now and then and had some communication with them. And it's not them, with the tribe, with various of the Indians. And General, it's an interesting life.
Well, how about your granddad? Didn't he have something?
Well, the story about my granddad is he had ridden his horse over to Animas, New Mexico, to bring back some horses back in his about 1900. It wasn't fenced. The Southwest didn't have barbed wire and fences and what all. So if you had a herd of horses, you turned them out and you hoped that they'd come back for a little hay or whatever. But horses got scattered. So somebody sent word there's 8 or 10 of your Lazy Bee horses here in Animas. So he went to get them. And it's about 60 miles from Animas back to Lazy Bee. So he camped out overnight. He had the horses and was driving them. And so he camped out overnight, and while he was in bed, he had a bedroll of some sort. Anyway, he heard the Indians come, and he thought, well, better just get a little deeper under the covers here. I'd rather let them have the horses and keep my life if that's my choice. And they didn't really threaten him, but they were forceful with getting the horses, and so they gathered all the horses and left with them. And he gathered his life and left with his life. So that was as close as the family came to a real run-in with the Apaches.
Close enough.
Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to be in his bed that night.
No. Well, yeah, he was vulnerable for sure. So today, W. Michael Farmer is with us, and he's going to talk Geronimo and some of his contemporaries, and it's just a topic I really have enjoyed reading about. Michael spent his formal career as a PhD physicist doing atmospheric research. For the past 15 years, he's been researching 19th century Apache history, Southwest culture, and writing stories. His novels have won Will Rogers Awards, New Mexico Arizona Book Awards, a Spur Finalist Award for the best first novel. And today he's with us to talk about Geronimo and other Apache and Chiricahua legends and the series of books that features them.
Well, before we get started, I want to know how the shift came about from doing atmospheric research to Indian history, and especially Apache.
Well, I'm delighted to be here and chat with you. I've always been interested in Indians. I can remember in fourth grade reading about the Plains Indians being forced onto reservations, and so I was a professor at the University of Tennessee Space Institute, and a contractor made me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I moved to New Mexico and stayed there about 15 years. And I learned a lot of the legends that still exist there, primarily the one about the Fountain murders, where in 1896 they just disappeared. And I had just moved back to Virginia from New Mexico, and I was finishing a technical book, and got to thinking about what had gone on in New Mexico back in the Fountain days, and decided that I would write myself a little fictional narrative, hoping to try to figure out or get some clear idea about maybe what had happened to Fountain. And I thought I could probably do it in about 10,000 words. Well, when I finished 180,000,
oh my!
I decided I really enjoyed writing, and that would be a productive thing to do when I retired. And so I've kept up the string of books.
Well, my ignorance is already on display. What's the Fountain murders?
The New Mexico Stockmen's Association in 1895 had hired Albert Fountain, who was a big-time Republican. He had published a newspaper, been in the state legislature. He even defended Billy the Kid. Of course, he lost in his trial. And the Stockmen's Association hired him to get rid of the small operators in the Tularosa Basin who were just bleeding them dry, taking what they called mavericks. Although a lot of people would dispute that they would actually fall in the class of mavericks.
Do you want to broaden out on that just a little? A maverick being unclaimed cow or steer, or
well, a maverick is basically a calf or a yearling that hasn't been branded yet. It can be with its mother, or it can pretty much do on its own. But if he doesn't yet have a brand, even though he clearly belongs with a particular herd, it doesn't make any difference. You can take the maverick and claim it as your own if you want. And they had gone through a terrific drought there in New Mexico. The big operators were barely hanging on, and the little ones were going out of business, except the ones that managed to take some of the cattle from the big operators. So Fountain started on the west side of the Rio Grande, up around Socorro, and in 1895 he had gone through the little operators up there. I think he convicted about 30 and sent them to federal prison. And he planned to next go over into the Tularosa Basin, and there he had a major political enemy named Oliver Lee, who was a really smart ranch operator, and was famous for being handy with a gun. He had been a deputy sheriff and a deputy marshal and the whole nine yards. But the Stockmen's Association was certain that he was behind all of the mavericking that was going on beyond there in the Tularosa Basin. And if they got him, they would probably put a stop to it. So Fountain put out a couple of stock detectives. He gathered evidence, and he was pretty sure that he could get a conviction against a man named Oliver Lee. That was the fast gun. And he had to go from Las Cruces over to Lincoln, New Mexico, which is about 100 miles away. And he'd already gotten death threats, and his wife nagged him to death to take their little 8-year-old son named Henry with him, because she believed nobody would attack a man with a little boy. Well, they left in early January in 1896, drove over the mountains. Fountain was at the grand jury for about 2 weeks, got convictions against Oliver Lee and several men that he worked with, and was coming back. He spent a couple of nights with friends on the way, and the 1st of February, he was headed home, and he was prepared for somebody to attack him. He drove his wagon with a rifle across his knees, and he met several people who begged him to wait a day. The mail driver he knew very well. Wait a day to stay with him so that he would have somebody to help him if he got in trouble. He just refused to do it. And about 2:00 in the afternoon, as nearly as people can estimate, he and the little boy in the wagon they were in turned off of the main road and went out into the desert straight for Oliver Lee's ranch, and disappeared. They've never been found. There was people all over the desert looking for them, and they were just not to be found. The governor was under tremendous pressure to solve the case, and he brought Pat Garrett out of retirement to take care of it. In fact, this was Garrett's last big case, and Garrett came in, and 2 years later, he took his evidence to the grand jury, which was not much more than what they knew the day they hired him. And the grand jury turned him down, said he didn't have enough evidence to hang a yellow dog. And Garrett went down the hall to Judge Franklin's office and got a bench warrant to arrest Lee and 2 of the men that were with him, Bill McNew and a man named Gleaned. And he went out to arrest him. Well, Lee had already left to go to El Paso on business, and McNew and Gleaned were in town waiting around till dark before they went back to their ranches. And
this was Lincoln was the town?
No, this was in Las Cruces.
Las Cruces, okay.
Right. Lee had taken off, and Gleaned and McNew were in town. They were waiting for dark because there were stories floating around that they were going to be ambushed when they got north of town. And Garrett arrested him and put him in solitary confinement. The rule was that if he had a bench warrant, then he could keep him for 3 months or until the next time the grand jury met. Well, he wound up keeping McNew, who was famous for his deep blue eyes and a 1,000-mile stare, and was really a pretty deadly gunfighter. But he had a wife who was pregnant. She was up in the Sacramento mountains by herself with 3 children, and Garrett locked him up and left him there unjustifiably for nearly a year. Wow. Finally, pardon. Finally, there was a trial in 1898 after Lee and Gleaned had turned themselves in, and the trial went on for 25 days. Called 75 witnesses, had night sessions. They had the most potent lawyers in the state at the time. In fact, the man who ran the Santa Fe ring, Catron, was the state's attorney, and he had agreed to prosecute the case for $1. When the case finally went to the jury, it was about 11:30 in the evening, and the judge told the jury, "Gentlemen, I know you're tired, and we want you to go get some rest and start deliberating on the case first thing in the morning." And the attorney for Lee and Gleaned, Albert Fall, famous future Secretary of the Interior, jumped up and said, "No, we want you to start right now. We're tired of this." And 8 minutes later, the jury came back and said, "Not guilty." Wow. And so
he knew his jury.
Day, to this day, nobody knows who actually killed the Fountains or where they disappeared to.
So this story is your first book, the 180,000 words that emerged from 10,000?
Yeah, pretty much.
So what's the name of this book? And B, do you have a theory after all that who killed those? The Fountains?
I do. There's let me give you the books first. I self-published the first book with that story in it, and then later, 5 Star Publishing picked it up, and it was published in 3 separate books. One was let me think. Well, the book that has everything in it is Hombrecito's War, and the next book following that was Hombrecito's Search, but that's neither here nor there. Do I have a theory? Yeah, there's a man, and I can't. It's been so long since I've looked at it. I can't recall the name, but
it's in the book.
Yeah, it is.
So they can read the book and get your theory. And we've got to take a break. We've kind of gone over, and then we want to come back and talk about Apaches.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, once again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us for the Cowboy Up podcast. We are grateful for your time and for your wonderful affirmations. Thank you so very much. And, of course, we have one of our regular friends and guests, Stuart Rosebrook from True West Magazine. And, Stuart, we're looking forward to it. So, Stuart, it's your turn in your town, and you're on.
Well, thank you, Stan, and Cowboy Up podcast listeners. I hope everybody's enjoying their holiday season, staying warm. Maybe you're enjoying a little vacation away from the snow and down at the beach somewhere or down in the desert, and have True West Magazine with you. We've got a great issue for January, February. It's our annual Best of the West issue. We've also combined it with our annual Top 10 Towns. And so it's a great travel issue to grab up and put in your bag for the year, because we highlight our favorites across the West in travel, Western wear, Western fare, Western books, Western preservation, firearms, arts and collectibles. And we have our True Westerner of 2024, Al Harper. Al Harper is the proprietor and owner of the Durango and Silverton Narrow Gauge Railroad. His family has been operating that railroad since the late 1990s. And Al and his family's company have also taken over recent management of Old Tucson. And we're looking forward to some big updates later this year to see how their partnership in management with the city of Tucson is going, and to revitalize that historic and wonderful place we all love, where so many wonderful Western movies and television shows have been produced in Old Tucson. We also have dedicated this issue to maybe the greatest icon of the American West, and some might say an icon of America, the cowboy. That's right. This issue is dedicated to that great icon of the West, known worldwide, the cowboy. And we have an incredible portfolio of photography from the 19th and early 20th century. And then we have a couple of fun columns in there. One's called Dude or Not a Dude. And look forward to hearing from our listeners to if they can spot who's a dude and who's not. And then we have an article I wrote called Silver Screen Buckaroos, tipping our hat to those men and women who made the cowboy famous right off the range. I think everyone will be surprised that so many working cowboys are responsible for bringing the cowboy code of the West to millions around the world, beginning with Buffalo Bill and Thomas Edison. We also have a great feature from Tucson historian John Langelier called A Real McCoy. It takes a look at the life and career of Tim McCoy. I think everybody's going to really enjoy that. It's a special issue. It's one to collect, and it's one to throw in your bag to help you guide your way through making decisions on travel, museums. If you're into collecting, we have a roundup on the great auctions of the past year, who's doing great Western preservation, and books and movies to look for, as well as our top 10 towns. And it shouldn't be anybody's surprise that Cody, Wyoming is this year's #1 town. So pick up the issue, and thanks for being readers of True West, and we greatly appreciate you. So have a great year, and we look forward to talking to you next month on the Cowboy Up podcast.
Well, we got to talk Apaches, my favorite topic. How'd you went from the Fountain murders, and what took you to the Apaches in general, and then we'll talk about specifics.
The story that I told in the Fountain murders, I assumed that the little boy survived, and he was saved by a Mescalero Apache policeman named Yellow Boy. And the reason he was called Yellow Boy was because he was such a phenomenal shot with his old brass receiver Henry rifle.
Right.
And So when I got to the end of the fountain story, I was thinking that I would really like to write a book about Yellow Boy, and that turned into a long trilogy. But the thing that really pushed me into it was that the Apaches had been forced into a place on the Pecos River called Bosque Redondo. And they had been told that was going to be their reservation. And it's called Bosque Redondo because the river made a big loop around a piece of land that was covered with trees, and it was really kind of an ideal spot for the size of the mescaleros that were there, and they were forced to take it. And then Kit Carson came along at the direction of the commanding general from California, and started warring on the Navajos, and every Navajo prisoner they sent down to Bosque Redondo. And things went from bad to worse. The water is out of the Pecos at that time, and I don't know about it now, but I suspect it's still so, is highly alkaline, and if you drink it, it's not good on your digestive system. And they had cut down all of the trees. They were having to drive women out into the desert, 18, 20 miles to dig up mesquite roots for firewood. And so Yellow Boy was born, or about 5 years old at that time in my imagination. And so I decided that what I would like to do is take a typical Apache character and follow him through their history, so the reader could see what they were going through his eyes. And I wound up having to learn something about Apache culture, and I find that is really fascinating. And,
well, you already were pretty proficient in Navajo culture, weren't you? But then Apache is different in what ways?
Actually, the Apaches and the Navajos are cousins. They both speak the same root language, and although the words often sound different, it's said that an Apache can understand a Navajo, but the Apaches had extraordinary rules and customs, and when I read it, I couldn't. I read about their culture. I couldn't help but think that they were like prototypical Hebrews, real old time Hebrews, because they wouldn't eat pork, they wouldn't eat fish, they wouldn't eat birds that ate snakes. The women always went through a puberty ceremony, and they were a matriarchal society, i.e. when a man married, he married into the woman's family, and there were just a lot of things like that really made the culture fascinating. And once you read that and then fold that into their history, it becomes a lot clearer that they did what they did.
So one of the Apaches you wrote about is Chato.
Right.
And why did you write about him, and give a bit of a background on him?
Well, I had decided to write a book, and I wound up writing about 5 on Geronimo. And when you go through the histories, a figure that keeps appearing over and over in the history of the Apache Wars was Chato. I have friends that have seen the movie Chato's Land, which is totally far removed from the actual history. But Chato was a fascinating character. He was Geronimo for a long time. He was Geronimo's segundo, his number 2 man, especially when they went on raids. And then he was a real hard nut warrior who wound up changing sides. He hated the whites for a long time, and then decided that he would help the army. And so I decided that Chato was a figure well worth trying to say something about.
Why did Chato switch to the Army's side, the U.S. Army side?
Well, in 1881, about 350 Apaches broke out of the San Carlos Reservation and went south with a great Apache war chief named Whoa. They were raiding heavily in Mexico, sometimes in the United States. And General Crook decided had been brought back from the Plains Wars to take care of the Apaches, and he took 190 Apache scouts, 50 troopers, regular cavalry troopers, and I think 270 pack mules across the border down into Mexico, into the Sierra Madre Mountains. They had found an Apache who had agreed to show him where those camps were, and that's a fascinating story in itself. But anyway, one of the first camps they located near the headwaters of the Bavispe River was part of Chato's, and Chato and most of the men were gone, and they took the camp, raided it, and just stunned the Apaches that they had actually found the camp and had talked the Mexicans into letting them come into Mexico to come after them. And Chato talked at some length with General Crook and decided that maybe he needed to rethink his position with the Army, and eventually he became an Army scout when Crook told him that he would do everything that he could diplomatically to get a wife and 2 children that Chato had in Mexico that had been taken in a raid on a camp he was in into slavery. And so Geronimo had the same thing happen to him. He had lost a wife and a child in that same raid. Crook told Chato and Geronimo. He told all of the leaders that they had to stay cool. They couldn't do anything that would get the Mexicans upset or the big chiefs in Washington upset, and they would do everything they could to get them out. But if they caused a stir, then they were basically gone. And so Chaco told Crook, if you can get me my family back, you'll have my loyalty till the day I die. And that's basically what happened.
Crook got the family back?
No, he didn't, but he got some pictures. He actually got some photographs from the Mexicans. The Mexicans said, well, we don't have slaves anymore, when in fact everybody knew that they did. And they sent some photographs to show in what great shape the wives and the children were in. And in fact, they said they're actually better off with us than they are with the Apaches.
Well, that's quite a story. Life was pretty tough back in those days, I think.
Yes, it was.
What was the tail end? Did he ever get reunited with his family?
No, he didn't. The wife that was taken was actually his number 2 wife. His number 1 wife had refused to go into Mexico with him, and so he told her, we're divorced, goodbye. And that's the way it worked with the Apaches.
I'm liking this story more and more.
No need for lawyers, huh? So I've seen somewhere that some people think Chato and Geronimo were similar. What's your thinking?
Yeah, it's kind of phenomenal. In fact, some people have said that Chato was Geronimo's doppelganger, his shadow. But they both waged war in their younger days under Mangus Coloradus on the Mexicans. They often lived on the same reservations at the same time. They both lost family to Mexican slavery. They were both village chiefs at Fort Sill. They both became Christians, but later left the church at Fort Sill. And both of them died from pneumonia after sleeping drunk in cold water.
Wow. So do you agree that what I've read is tenaciously the Apaches, particularly under Geronimo, fought the American soldiers and, burned and murdered ranchers and ranches, and they had a special hatred for the Mexicans. Is that true?
Geronimo had a special hatred for the Mexicans, especially those from Sonora, because in his younger days, he had taken his wife and 3 children on a trading trip with with Mangus Coloradus down into Mexico. And the Sonorans were really anxious to get rid of the Apaches, and they sent a troop over to that camp and wiped out his entire family, including his mother, who was with him. So, and one day he lost his wife, Alupe, 3 children under 10, and his mother. And the great Apache god Usen is said to have told him that he would not die in war from a bullet or an arrow. And he went forward from that, and every chance that he got, he killed the Mexicans.
Yeah. And so with Geronimo, he's a central figure in several of your books. Is that
Right?
And
that's correct.
And I like I can't reproduce it, but on your website, very nice website, there was a quote, not yours, talking about fiction is searching for the truth, and you can make it better than that.
That's right. That's a quote from Oakley Hall.
Right. I should have written it down, but then it talks about how historical fiction is what I took from it is a mode of finding the truth rather than the details, and is that how you see it?
Yeah, very, very much so. In fact, that's why I started writing the fountain story to try to get at the truth. But I think that the thing that, cut and dried history really doesn't tell you much about the personalities and the behind the scene things that go on in life that really drive what happens historically. And so when I write about Apaches, I don't want to write them necessarily as bloodthirsty savages, but as real human beings who certainly deserve our consideration and understanding. They've had an exceptionally hard life, or they did in those days, and I think to get at the truth behind why they were so adamant, for example, about going after Mexicans, or why they raided the way that they did, is worth trying to understand and investigate.
What's next for you?
I'm working on a 2-volume story about the Apache Kid. He was the most feared outlaw in the Southwest at the turn of the last century.
Around 1900 was when he was...
Right. He there's a big dispute. Linda Sanchez put a very well put together piece of history that suggests that a posse of Mormons killed him around 1900, because that's close to the time that he disappeared. But the White Mountain Apaches, who are relatives of the kid, claim that he was living in Mexico as late as 1924, and so the kid was really a phenomenon. He was kind of a protege of Al Sieber, the chief of scouts for General Crook, and he was a phenomenal athlete, a runner, and he was really smart. And Sieber and others taught him English, how to speak English, and really helped him along. 6 months after he had first enlisted in the Army as a scout, he was a first sergeant.
Wow!
And this is when he's like very early 20s.
Well, I've read several times that without the scouts, we'd still be chasing Geronimo's grandchildren around out there somewhere. So we've got
exactly right.
So it took Indians It took Apaches to catch the Apaches, I think is pretty safe to say. Well, we've gone way over time. Your website, give us that because it was good and it gives access to all these books.
Right. It's wmichaelfarmer.com, one word.
Okay, and everything is spelled normally, W. Michael Farmer, it's all together, .com.
Right.
And the books are available where books are available, I'm guessing.
Yeah, they're available at just about all of the online sources. They are in some bookstores, and they're easy to order if you like, and you can send me an email and I'll send you one.
Perfect. So they can order from your website too then. And Apache Kid, any idea when that 2-volume set is out?
The first volume will be out in early 25.
Okay. So it's out there a little ways. All right. Are you coming to Tucson for the Festival of Books?
I hope to, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, we'll hope to see you in March.
We'll look for you there.
You bet.
You stop by here, and we'll sit you down and bleed your brain a little more.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.
You bet. Adios.
And thank you, gentlemen cowboys. Always stories and a sense of even adventure as we listen to a little bit about the true West history. Well, we'd like to encourage you. The weather is going to be up about high 60s and 70s in Tucson today. And so we will hopefully have you join us someday soon. So that's what I'm going to encourage you to do. The White Stallion Ranch is where this program is produced. It's a historic place, and we are here to help you discover your inner cowboy. That's right, your inner cowboy. So might I suggest that as you're looking at the holiday season, some of you are celebrating the Festival of Lights, the Christmas time, and then 24 is before us, and maybe a special gift would be to tell the people you love, say, hey, we're going to have our gift delivered just a little bit later. We're going to take some time this winter to go down and have a cowboy adventure at the White Stallion Ranch. So I would recommend that you do that, and I would appreciate if you would tell them, hey, I really enjoy the Cowboy Up podcast. I'm Stan Houston, and I am privileged with What It Takes Radio and the Cowboy Spirit USA Network. We produce and put this program together, and I want to thank all of my friends who do that work, and I want to thank you particularly for listening and recommending us to others.
You know, Alan, I think, it was Michael Farmer was talking about that the Apaches, and particularly some of them, Cherokee and a few other bands, were pretty brutal, and I think his words were they deserve consideration. And to me, it's just it's the age-old story. Somebody's occupying some land, some other folks want it, and things don't go too well after that. And I love a book called Once They Move Like the Wind, which is a book about Cochise, Geronimo, and all the Indian wars involving the Cherokees, and it's a very dispassionate but still readable book. It just sort of says, hey, this was some Wild West rough country, and a lot of bad stuff happened.
Well, and I think ultimately the white man just reproduced so much and so fast that they just swamped everybody else. They just overran.
They sure did.
Well, maybe that's good.
And when you think about it, the Apaches came in, they werelatecomers. Athabascans, like the Navajos, they came in not too soon before the Apaches. Before the Spanish, and they came in and really gave the back then called Papa Goat, Tono Odoms, a really hard time. And some of the other tribes of Pimas and folks that were here, the Apaches weren't their friends either. So humans in general can be pretty rough.
Yeah, that says it.
History is fascinating, and so are Michael Farmer's books. A Western shout out to Stan Huston's production company for bringing this episode to you. Next week, the Cowboys chat with Sherry Monahan about her new book, Signature Dishes of America. Sonoran spice brisket, cheese steak, chocolate chess pie. Tune in to learn the history of these mouth-watering Epicurean delights. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.